Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to talk to you all today about a very important subject, who to some, it's a matter of life and death. And that subject is this. No, not Slayer, heavy metal. Heavy metal music and all its related forms have always gotten a bad reputation from just about anywhere you look, from political leaders to religious leaders to parents all across the U.S. But I'm here to tell you that what they say isn't necessarily true. Heavy metal is just like any other kind of music. It too has its own messages and stories it wants to get out to the world. And I'll share with you today some of those messages and such to show you that it's not just some mindless rabble trying to get you to rage against the system. Many heavy metal songs and bands draw upon the imagery of chaos, either to sell their songs or for inspiration. Songs such as Crazy Train from Ozzy Osbourne or Madhouse from Anthrax are examples of this. But to these critics, that's all they see it as a kind of just crazy song that's just out there for no simple reason. It sounds like metal crashing against other metal, and view these songs as a sign of trying to get the youth to rebel. That's not always the case, though. And I'd like to open up with that from a quote from this book. In fact, because when it comes to the imagery of chaos, not all heavy metal songs use it. Some actually call for arms against it. And I quote, "Although some lyrics issue strong challenges to the sources of disorder and urge listeners to fight the good fight, i.e. Manowar's Dark Avenger, most are equivocal." And wasn't there an earlier genre that was also blasted, just like how metal is today, for drawing upon imagery that the public audience might not necessarily like? I'm a little bit fuzzy when it comes to this history of music, but I believe it was jazz who initially started the sense of putting sorrow or harsh times and a harsh reality in their kind of music. And they too were also kind of blasted from critics and the audiences for bringing that subject out through their music. Heavy metal also does that in their own way, through their own beats and styles, by talking about things that people may not want to hear but do exist in this world, such as murder and death. They're very much real things, and they sing about those kind of subjects as well in metal. So it's interesting how we go from one subject of music to another to find criticism. It's probably safe to say, though, that because of this kind of chaotic nature, that this next idea was spawned. Most likely than any other genre of music, heavy metal is always hailed as a kind of music for Satanists, or it's satanic, trying to turn religious Christian or Catholic people into worshiping the devil and sinning. That is very far from the truth. And of course, one of the more widely known bands to be quote-unquote satanic would have to be the very band I'm wearing right now on my shirt, Slayer. From an outside point of view, it doesn't look too good for them. What with albums called God Hates Us All and other albums with art of a mutilated Jesus Christ on the front. From an outside point of view, yeah, that looks pretty bad. But from those who actually listen to what the band members say themselves, number one, they write about subjects that interest them, such as, from the point of the lead singer Tom Araya, he's interested in Nazis and murder and psychopaths. It's subjects like these, public's taboos that interest him. And one of the guitarists in Slayer, Kerry King, is actually an atheist and doesn't even believe in anything at all. And moving on about Kerry King as well, he was interviewed in the magazine Guitar World back in 2001. And he was interviewed for the specific purpose of the album God Hates Us All, because he wrote 80% of that album, lyric-wise. And in the magazine, he was quoted for saying, "I wrote 80% of the title God Hates Us All, not necessarily as a anti-Christian kind of title, but because we've all been there once in our lives. You wake up, you have a good day, and you're going about your life as usual, and all of a sudden you're hit by a car or your dog dies. And the only thing going through your mind is, man, God really hates me today." Maybe not word for word, but I think we've been there ourselves on those kind of really bad days. And it's blind accusations as this, that metal is satanic, that can actually lead into harsher outcomes. How many of you have heard of the West Memphis 3? Yeah, all right, cool. The story of the West Memphis 3 is actually kind of a dark tale. It was back in either 1993 or 1994. outside in Memphis, go figure, in a forest nearby, there were 2 children around the ages of 8 years old who were actually found murdered and mutilated. The police never actually found who did it at the time, so they went and found a scapegoat, say. They found 3 teenagers and immediately put them on trial, and they were swiftly put into jail, even though there was no connection between them or the crime itself. In the courthouse, what they mainly drew their evidence from was the fact that one of the teenagers had black hair, torn up jeans, listened to heavy metal music, and wore heavy metal T-shirts. They're still in prison today, actually. And I'd like to end this idea of heavy metal and Satanism with yet another quote that summarizes just frankly how ridiculous this can be. And I quote, "Metal's reinterpretation of these symbols, hell, the devil, things of that sort, is lost on the cultural conservatives who stick to their own literal readings of those symbols. Their dichotomy is between faith and sin, lacking any conception of positive affirmation of rebellious vitality. They must judge heavy metal to be sinful and a direct competitor to them." Though the messages aren't satanic, metal definitely has its own messages to get across. For example, there's the band Disturbed. On their previous album, Indestructible, they released a song called Inside the Fire. And it's actually really interesting if you look up the music video, the uncensored one, to Inside the Fire, because the song doesn't even open up with the song itself. It actually opens up with the lead singer of Disturbed having a message for his audience. And he talks about suicide and how it's still a problem in the world around us, and that there are people who still commit suicide, either out of depression or for whatever reason that makes them come to such extreme circumstances. And he starts the song saying, there's still hope for people who are even thinking about suicide, and he urges people to call the suicide hotline. He wrote the entire song about Inside the Fire, about suicide, trying to get the public aware, because he too was a victim of someone close to him who committed suicide. The Metallica album, And Justice for All, was actually written and composed simply because of the political injustice at the time. And Avenged Sevenfold also had a song called Critical Acclaim, which the lead singer wrote about to support the troops in Iraq, because many times, just like the Vietnam War, they too are hailed as in a war they shouldn't be in, and there's political leaders who either try to put them down or restrain them. And he wrote the song specifically to support the troops in Iraq. Anyone who's heard the songs and the lyrics know exactly what I'm talking about. I can't quote them, however, because they're too graphic. But some of these songs we just get looked over entirely at once. And I like to quote one last thing from this book. It's a story that I found very powerful that I simply just couldn't summarize, and I'd have to share this with all of you today. Back in the 80s, they would actually burn heavy metal records and CDs. And this is an account from one student in Florida who attended one. One Thursday we were taken to where a man gave a sermon of the evils that were assaulting our youth. He spoke mainly about rock music. After several minutes of whipping the crowd into a frenzy, he said we should purge our lives of this evil, just as he was about to do. He then began to line from lyrics or statement of condemnation and break it, throwing albums into the raging fire. Many albums later, he held up the Pat Benatar single, Hell is for Children. He said, "This song openly promotes devil worshipping among our youth." He had lied about many records, but this was the worst. We started shouting things like, "That's BS, and you've never read the lyrics." Without a moment's hesitation, he said, "See how the devil despises his work. His evil is deeply ingrained. Don't be surprised if your children are as intolerant." Benatar, a hard rock singer, had written the condemned song as a denunciation of child abuse. Music is art. It comes in many forms, and some people like it one way, and others another. Heavy metal is also music, and it too should be treated as one, instead of as an excuse for people to label as something as evil in society. Well, no matter what, despite the critics for all this that they get hailed on, metal is strong, and just as Man-O-War put it, they can't stop us, let them try. For heavy metal, we will die. Thank you. Here's my big talk.